Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. The cruelest thing Alyssa did wasn't the cheating. It was the way she forced me out of our home at night, threatened to call the police and say I was aggressive, then let another man into the house before my taillights cleared the street. Here's how it happened. On paper, we looked steady in Columbus, Ohio. Married 5 years, both working, a modest 2-story home in a quiet subdivision where the mailboxes all matched and nobody parked on the grass. I'm Malik Grant, a facilities supervisor for a hospital network. Alyssa worked in procurement for a regional logistics company. We weren't flashy, but we were building, or I thought we were. The shift started small, the way betrayal likes to arrive, quiet enough that you blame yourself first. Alyssa got busy in a way that didn't include me. Her laughter moved behind closed doors. Her phone stayed face down like it carried secrets that might jump out and bite. When I asked how her day went, she answered with one word, then asked me if I had paid the water bill like I was a roommate. I tried to adjust instead of accuse. I cooked more, cleaned more, asked less. I told myself marriage had seasons, that stress could make people sharp. I told myself love meant staying through the rough parts. But there's a difference between rough parts and being slowly pushed out of your own life. 2 weeks before everything broke, Alyssa started dressing up on random weekdays. Hair sleek, perfume stronger than usual, heels that clicked like punctuation. When I complimented her, she didn't soften. She looked at me like I'd spoken out of turn. "It's for work," she said, and walked right past me, already typing. I never wanted to be the man who checks his wife's location. I never wanted to be the man who reads between lines until the lines turn into knives. But one evening, after she came home late and went straight to the shower without greeting me, her phone lit up on the counter with a banner notification. A name I didn't recognize. A message that read, "Tomorrow night. Same place. You sure he won't be there?" My stomach tightened so fast it felt like gravity changed. I didn't open the message. I didn't touch her phone. I just stood there staring at a glowing rectangle that made my whole marriage feel like a stage set. When Alyssa came out, towel wrapped, she saw my face and narrowed her eyes. "What's wrong with you? Who is that texting you?" I asked. I kept my voice calm because I knew how quickly women get punished for men's anger, and I refused to become the kind of man who scares people. But Alyssa heard calm as weakness. She smirked. "You're doing that thing again," she said. "Acting insecure." "I'm acting married," I replied. "I'm asking my wife, who's sending messages about meeting somewhere." Alyssa's expression didn't crack. No guilt, no apology, just irritation, like I'd interrupted her favorite show. "It's work," she said again. Then she stepped closer, eyes hard. "And even if it wasn't, you don't get to police me." That sentence, "you don't get to," was new in our home. It wasn't just defiance. It was ownership. Like she decided I had no standing in the space we shared. I felt something in me begin to split. The part that wanted to believe her and the part that had been paying attention for months. The next day at work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept replaying the message. "Tomorrow night. Same place." The phrase sounded practiced. I texted Alyssa mid-afternoon. "Can we talk tonight?" Like really talk. She replied an hour later. About what? No question mark. No warmth. When I got home, she wasn't there. Her car was gone. The house felt hollow, like it knew something I didn't. I fed our dog, King, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the family calendar Alyssa insisted we keep, color-coded, neat, still pretending we were a team. Around 9:30 p.m., Alyssa came in quiet, like she was trying not to be heard. But I heard the lock. I heard her heels. I heard the small exhale that sounded like she was annoyed to have to return. She froze when she saw me sitting there. "We need to talk," I said. "Tonight." Alyssa set her purse down slowly. "You're doing this right now. When would be better? When you're not here?" I asked. "When you're asleep? When you're texting him?" Her eyes flashed. "I'm not doing this," she snapped. "I'm tired. I've had a long day." "So have I said. "But I'm not the one coming home smelling like a different room." That did it. Alyssa stepped forward like she wanted to tower over me. "You're not going to accuse me in my own house," she said. "Our house," I corrected. The words barely left my mouth before she laughed. One short, ugly laugh. Pack a bag, she said. Get out. I blinked. What? You heard me, she said, already walking toward the hallway. I'm not living with a man who interrogates me. Pack a bag and go stay with whoever you need to stay with. My throat went dry. Alyssa, you can't just throw me out. She turned back, eyes cold and steady. Watch me. I stood up slowly, hands open at my sides. This is insane. If you're angry, fine. If you want space, we can. No, she cut in. You don't get to negotiate. You don't get to talk your way out of this like you always try to do. I'm done. It hit me then. She wasn't bluffing. She'd rehearsed this. The certainty in her voice sounded like a plan that started long before tonight. Alyssa walked into the kitchen and pulled open a drawer. Her fingers closed around the spare key fob to our alarm system and the garage remote. She held them up like proof she controlled the air in the room. My cousin Tasha is coming by, she said. If you're still here when she gets here, I'll call the police and tell them you're acting aggressive. The word aggressive landed like a trap. I was a black man in America standing in a doorway while my wife threatened to weaponize a narrative. I didn't need her to say more. I understood exactly what she was doing. I haven't done anything, I said, voice tighter now. I'm standing here talking. And I'm telling you to leave, she replied. So leave. Don't make this ugly. My chest felt squeezed from the inside. Not just heartbreak, fear. Not of her, but of what she could do with one phone call. Alyssa knew that. She was counting on it. I looked toward the stairs, toward our bedroom, where my clothes hung next to hers like they belonged in the same future. I looked at King, who stood near the living room with his head tilted, confused by the tension. Alyssa saw me look at the dog and frowned. King stays, she said immediately. He's mine. We got him together, I said. He stays, she repeated, sharper. You're not taking anything else from me. The audacity of that, for me, nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand my rights. But the threat of that false call hovered over every word I could say. So I swallowed my dignity like a stone and went upstairs. I packed in a numb rush. Jeans, work shirts, a jacket, my toiletries. Each item felt like a piece of myself I was pulling out of the life we built. Downstairs, I heard Alyssa laugh at something on her phone. Soft, pleased, like she was texting someone who made her feel lighter now that I was being removed. Tasha arrived 20 minutes later. I didn't know her well, but I knew enough. She walked in without greeting me, eyes scanning the house like she was checking for damage after a storm. Alyssa leaned toward her and murmured something I couldn't hear. Tasha nodded once, then looked at me like I was an inconvenience that needed clearing. I came down with my duffel bag and paused at the bottom step. Alyssa stood by the front door, holding it open. You can come get the rest of your things this weekend, she said. Text first. I don't want drama. Alyssa, I said, voice cracking despite my effort. Please, just talk to me like I'm your husband. She rolled her eyes. You're being emotional. Go. I stepped outside. Cold air hit my face, and for a second I expected her to call me back, to soften, to realize she'd gone too far. But the door shut behind me with a clean finality that felt like someone closing a casket. I walked to my car like my body belonged to someone else. I threw the duffel in the back seat, sat behind the wheel, and stared at my house, my porch light, my windows, the curtains Alyssa picked. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from a shared device system we never turned off. Front doorbell camera. New clip recorded. My heart started beating in my throat. I tapped the notification and watched the live clip load. The camera angle showed the porch. The sound was clear, crisp, too clear. Alyssa opened the door with a smile I hadn't seen in months. A man stood there, tall, confident, dressed like he belonged. I couldn't see his full face at first, but I heard his voice. You sure? He asked. Alyssa laughed, breathy, excited. Yeah, she said. He's gone. The man stepped closer. That was easy. It was overdue, Alyssa replied, and her voice carried through my phone speaker like it was inside my car. Come in. Park in the garage. Then the camera caught her hand on his chest as she pulled him in. The door closed. The clip ended. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone like it had spoken a language that only pain could translate. My marriage didn't end with a conversation. It ended with audio proof of my replacement. My hand shook so hard I had to set the phone down in my lap. I didn't go back to the door. I didn't pound on it. I didn't scream into the neighborhood. I knew what Alyssa would do. Call the police, cry, say I was unstable. And I'd be the headline, not her. So I swallowed my rage until it burned and drove away from my own house like I was trespassing. I went to Cincinnati to my older brother Marcus because I had nowhere else that felt safe. The drive was a blur of highway lights and numbness. I arrived after midnight and stood on his porch with my duffel, feeling like a man who had been evicted from his own identity. Marcus opened the door in sweatpants, eyes heavy with sleep. The moment he saw my face, he woke up fully. Malik? What happened? I tried to answer, but my throat locked. I stepped inside and the warmth of his house hit me. Normal warmth, ordinary peace, and it made my eyes sting. I couldn't explain everything. I could only tell the truth in pieces. She threw me out, I said finally. And she wasn't sorry. Marcus didn't ask a dozen questions. He just took my duffel, set it down, and pulled me into a hug that made my chest ache. You're here, he said. That's what matters tonight. I slept in his guest room, but I didn't stay. Every time I drifted off, I heard Alyssa's voice again. He's gone. I woke up sweating, heart hammering like I'd been chased. At 5:47 a.m., I sat up and played the doorbell clip again with the volume low. The evidence was loud, even in a whisper. By morning, Alyssa texted me like she was scheduling a delivery. You can come get the rest of your things this weekend. Text before you come. Don't make it weird. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she did. Just control. I stared at her message until my eyes hurt. Then I replied with one word. Okay. Not because I accepted it, but because I was done giving her my emotions for free. Marcus made coffee and watched me stare into my cup like it might show me a different life. You want to go back there and talk? He asked. There's nothing to talk about, I said. She planned this. Then what are you going to do? I didn't know yet. I only knew I couldn't be reckless. I couldn't let grief turn me into a headline or a cautionary tale. Alyssa was already willing to use systems against me. I needed to move like someone who planned to survive. That afternoon, I called off work with a sick day and sat in Marcus's dining room scrolling through everything I could access. Shared bills, joint account summaries, mortgage statements. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed to understand how much of my life Alyssa still had her hands on. I found charges that didn't make sense. Weekend hotel stays in downtown Columbus when Alyssa claimed she was visiting her aunt. Ride shares at midnight. Restaurants we never went to together. A repeating payment labeled with a storage company name across town. A storage unit. I felt my stomach twist. The storage payment wasn't huge, but it was consistent. The kind of thing you pay when you're hiding something you want to keep separate from your home. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself, then backed them up again. I didn't trust the ground under me anymore. The next morning, I called a family law attorney in Columbus, Renee Whitaker, recommended by a coworker years ago. I expected to feel shame making the call, like I was admitting failure. Instead, I felt something steadier, a need to protect myself. Renee's voice was calm and direct. She asked for basics, marriage length, assets, whether there was any domestic violence history. When I told her Alyssa threatened to call the police and say I was aggressive, Renee went quiet for a beat. Then she said, save that doorbell clip in multiple places. Do not go back alone. And do not argue with her in person. She locked me out, I said. Can she do that? No, Renee replied. Not legally. But people do illegal things when they believe you won't challenge them. I felt my eyes burn. She has her dog. We'll address that, Renee said. One step at a time. I need you to be safe and documented. Renee filed for temporary orders regarding access to the home and property. Nothing dramatic, just paperwork moving through quiet channels. But that paperwork mattered. It was the first time since Alyssa kicked me out that I felt the world recognize I existed. Alyssa didn't respond like a remorseful wife. She responded like someone angry. She couldn't control the narrative anymore. She texted me, furious. Why are you doing this? You're being petty. Petty. That word made me laugh once, sharp and hollow. She threw me out and moved him in, but I was petty for seeking legal access to my own home. 2 days later, I got an email from Renee, a hearing date, instructions, and a reminder. Do not contact her directly except in writing about logistics. I stared at the email and felt grief pressing on me again. Not because I missed Alyssa's love, but because I missed who I thought she was. The week dragged on. I went back to work in Cincinnati temporarily, using PTO where I could, and told my manager only what I had to. Marriage issues. I'm staying with family for a bit. My coworkers didn't pry. But every time someone asked how my weekend was, I had to swallow the truth like it was too hot to speak. On Friday night, Alyssa called for the first time since she threw me out. Her voice came through soft and shaky, like she practiced crying. "Malik," she said, "can we talk?" I said nothing. I could hear her breathing, controlled but dramatic. "I can explain," she whispered. "I didn't mean for things to go like this." The words hit me like a cheap costume pulled from a closet. Now she wanted conversation. Not when she was telling me to pack a bag. Not when she was threatening to call the police. Not when she was welcoming him inside. Only now, when paperwork existed. "I heard you," I said quietly. "Hear me?" she asked, confusion flickering. "On the doorbell camera," I said. "I heard you say he's gone. I heard you invite him into the garage." Silence. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation, her brain searching for a way out. Then she sniffed, as if she could turn shock into sympathy. "That's not what it sounded like," she said. "You're taking it the wrong way." My chest tightened. "I'm taking it the way it happened." "Malik," she said, voice sharpening, "why are you trying to destroy me?" That sentence, "destroy me," was the moment I understood she still didn't see me as a person she hurt. She saw me as an obstacle to her comfort. I ended the call without another word and sat on Marcus's back steps in the cold, shaking. Not from fear this time, from the realization that Alyssa would never give me closure because she didn't believe I deserved it. The next day, Renee arranged for me to retrieve essential items from the house with a civil standby. I didn't want police involvement, but I also refused to walk into a trap. I drove to Columbus with Marcus beside me. My stomach knotted the whole way. When we pulled onto my street, my throat tightened. There was a car I didn't recognize in the driveway, dark gray sedan. My hands clenched the steering wheel. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That him?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I said, but I already knew. Alyssa opened the door before I even reached the porch. She looked irritated, not ashamed. Behind her shoulder, I saw a man's silhouette move through the hallway like he belonged there. "You really brought them here," Alyssa said, eyes flicking toward the officer. "You threatened to call them on me," I said evenly. "So yeah, I did." She scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I walked past her into the house that still smelled like my laundry detergent and my dog's fur. The king rushed toward me, tail wagging hard, whining like he'd been waiting. I crouched and grabbed his collar, pressing my forehead to his head for 1 second. One small mercy in a week of hurt. "He stays," Alyssa snapped immediately. I stood slowly. "We'll address that through the attorneys," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, almost flat. The pain was still there, but it had hardened into something functional. I went upstairs and packed more essentials while the officer waited nearby. As I moved through the bedroom, I noticed Alyssa's side of the closet had more empty hangers than before. She'd been moving my life around while I was gone. On the nightstand, her ring lay there like a discarded prop. In the bathroom, I found a cologne I didn't wear. Not hidden, not ashamed, just sitting there like a flag. My stomach turned, and for a moment, I thought I might throw up. I swallowed it down and kept packing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. On my way out, I glanced into the living room and finally saw him clearly. A black man about my age, neat haircut, confident posture, wearing socks on my carpet. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked curious, like he was studying the man Alyssa had described as a problem. Alyssa stood close to him, too close, and when she saw my eyes on them, she lifted her chin. "This is Evan Pierce," she said, tone daring me to react. "We're together." Evan offered a small nod, almost polite, but his eyes weren't kind. They were assessing. Something in me went quiet. Not numb, clear. "Good luck," I said and walked out with my boxes. Alyssa didn't follow. She didn't call my name. She didn't ask me to stay. She only slammed the door hard enough that the porch camera probably recorded it too. Back in Cincinnati, Renee pushed the case forward, separation of accounts, documentation of the lockout threat, a request for temporary possession considerations, and equitable access. I learned a new kind of exhaustion, legal exhaustion, where every form you fill out is proof your life got broken and now you're rebuilding it with paper. Meanwhile, the financial trail kept growing. I noticed charges on our joint card that weren't mine, electronics, restaurant tabs, and repeated gas purchases near the storage facility. Renee told me, "Don't confront her. Keep collecting." So I did. Screenshots, PDFs, dates, amounts. Quietly, I drove past the storage place one evening just to see it. Beige buildings lined up like secrets in rows. A keypad gate. Cameras. I sat in my car and stared, feeling stupid for still being shocked. The woman I married was paying rent on a place to hide parts of herself from me. Renee filed a motion to compel certain disclosures. Alyssa's attorney responded with the usual language: denials, minimizations, irreconcilable differences. But the tone shifted when Renee included the doorbell audio transcript and the lockout threat. Suddenly, Alyssa wasn't the one seeking peace. She was the one explaining why peace required threatening police. Then karma started to move, not as a lightning bolt, but as consequences stacking like bricks. The first crack came from Alyssa's job. I didn't contact them. I didn't have to. Alyssa made a mistake that people like her always make when they feel untouchable. She got sloppy. One of the charges I flagged was marked as reimbursable, coded under a vendor account. That didn't make sense for a personal purchase. Renee advised me to let the divorce process handle the financial aspect, but she also noted quietly, if there is fraud, it tends to reveal itself once disclosures begin. A week later, Alyssa called again. This time her voice wasn't soft. It was strained. "Did you talk to me about my job?" she demanded. "No," I said. "Why would I?" "Because someone is asking questions," she snapped. "HR compliance. They're saying things about reimbursements." I felt a strange stillness. "That sounds like your problem," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I realized they were true. For months, Alyssa had made me feel like everything was my fault. Now the world was finally handing her the weight she'd been dodging. "Malik," she said, voice breaking, "I swear I didn't. This is getting out of control." I almost laughed. Out of control? She threw me out, moved him in, and threatened to weaponize the police. But the consequences were out of control. "I'm not discussing your job," I said. "Talk to your attorney." "Please," she whispered, and for the first time I heard something close to fear. Not remorse. Fear of losing comfort. I ended the call again. Afterward, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. I realized something painful and freeing. Alyssa didn't miss me. She missed the version of life where I absorbed damage quietly. The next blow came from Evan. I learned through one of Alyssa's angry texts, sent by mistake to me instead of Tasha, that Evan couldn't deal with the stress and needed space. The man who walked in my house like he owned it was suddenly fragile when the environment changed. Alyssa tried to reframe it as my fault. "You wouldn't have left if you didn't make this so ugly." I stared at the message and felt my grief finally shift into something colder. She still believed I was responsible for her choices. She still believed I existed to cushion her consequences. The hearing arrived. I wore a clean suit, not for intimidation, but for self-respect. Renee sat beside me, calm and prepared. Alyssa entered with her attorney and avoided my eyes until she didn't, until she looked straight at me with a glare that said, "How dare you not fold?" The judge didn't care about her glare. The judge cared about facts, shared residence, forced lockout threat, documented audio, financial disclosures. There were no speeches, no cinematic reveals, just a system, slow and imperfect, finally noticing the imbalance Alyssa tried to create. Temporary orders granted structured access and boundaries. Account separation progressed. The judge admonished both parties to avoid escalation. But Alyssa's attorney's posture had changed. Less confident, more cautious. They had realized there was a record, a trail. Alyssa couldn't cry her way out of documentation. After court, Alyssa tried to catch me in the hallway. "Malik," she said, voice urgent. Renee stepped between us gently. "All communication through counsel," she said. Alyssa's eyes flashed with humiliation. She wasn't used to being blocked. She was used to moving people. When she couldn't move me, she looked smaller, not because she felt sorry, but because she felt powerless. Weeks passed. My life shrank and then slowly widened again. I rented a small apartment in Cincinnati, clean, quiet, nothing fancy. I bought a used couch. I hung no photos at first because it felt like lying to pretend I had a stable future. But I kept waking up, kept going to work, kept eating even when food tasted like paper. Marcus checked on me without hovering. Some nights we watched basketball and didn't talk about Alyssa at all, and that silence was a kind of healing, proof that my identity wasn't only husband. Renee called one afternoon and said, "We received disclosures about the storage unit." My throat tightened. "And it's in Alyssa's name," Renee said. "Payments trace back to your joint account and also appear to be tied to reimbursement activity at her job." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the same posture I'd held on the night Alyssa came home late. But this time I didn't feel helpless. I felt present. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Renee said carefully, "that if her employer is investigating, they may demand repayment. And in divorce proceedings, improper use of marital funds can affect settlement." Karma, I realized, wasn't a thunderclap. It was the slow closing of doors Alyssa thought would stay open forever. Alyssa's next call came from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Crying hard now. Voice messy. Malik, please. They suspended me. They're saying I have to pay back money. I can't. Please, I need help." I listened once, then deleted it. Not because I was cruel, but because I had finally learned this. Alyssa's emergencies were not my responsibility anymore. She had made sure of that when she opened the door and said, "He's gone." The dog situation took longer. Alyssa used King like leverage, refusing to cooperate. Renee pushed through formal channels. Eventually, with documentation that I'd been primary caregiver during certain periods, plus proof of shared acquisition and care costs, the compromise came through. I would get scheduled time, then full possession pending final settlement. It wasn't instant justice, but it was a movement. The day I got King back, officially with paperwork, I sat on my apartment floor and cried into his fur like a child. It wasn't just a dog. It was the first tangible thing I'd lost that I got back without begging Alyssa for mercy. Alyssa spiraled as her control slipped. She texted insults, then apologies, then threats, then silence. Her messages came in waves, like she couldn't decide whether to punish me or recruit me. Through it all, I stayed bored. I stayed documented. I stayed quiet. One evening, Tasha showed up at Marcus's house unannounced while I was there. Marcus stepped onto the porch and blocked her from entering. "What do you want?" he asked. Tasha's face twisted with contempt. "Tell Malik to stop trying to ruin Alyssa," she snapped. "Alyssa made a mistake, okay? He's dragging it." Marcus didn't flinch. "Dragging it?" he said. She threw him out and moved her boyfriend in the same night. Tasha scoffed. He wasn't supposed to find out like that. Marcus stared at her for a long beat. "Get off my porch," he said quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Tasha left muttering under her breath, but I saw it in her shoulders. Even she felt the ground shifting. Months later, the settlement process tightened. Renee negotiated calmly. Alyssa's side asked for things like they still had leverage, requests that assumed I would sacrifice for the sake of peace. Renee responded with numbers, records, and the simple truth. Alyssa had used intimidation to remove me, then used shared funds recklessly, then got caught in a work investigation that made her financial position unstable. Alyssa wanted to keep the house, but keeping the house required money she no longer had and credibility she no longer owned. The quiet reality became unavoidable. She could not maintain the life she thought she'd secured by pushing me out. The day Alyssa lost the house wasn't seen. There was no crowd, no shouting match in the driveway. It was an email, a signature, a timeline. She moved out on a date set by agreements and bank requirements. The same system she tried to weaponize against me ended up evicting her from the fantasy she built on my suffering. Evan never returned. From what I heard through a mutual acquaintance, he had moved on quickly, The way people do when they were never invested in the person, only the convenience. Alyssa wasn't special to him once she stopped being comfortable. Alyssa tried one final time to pull me back into her orbit. She showed up at the hospital parking lot where I worked, waiting by my car, like we were still a couple who could talk things out. I saw her from a distance and felt my body go tense, old fear waking up. Then I breathed and kept walking. She stepped toward me. "Malik, please," she said, eyes glassy. I didn't think it would go this far. I kept my voice low. "It went exactly as far as you pushed it." "I was angry," she whispered. "You were accusing me." "I was married to you," I said. "And you threatened to call the police on me. You kicked me out. You said I was aggressive. You knew what that could do." Alyssa flinched like the truth had weight. For a second, I saw something close to shame, but it didn't last. Her face tightened again with self-preservation. "So you're just going to let me drown?" she asked. I looked at her, this woman I once planned a future with, and felt something quiet settle into place. "I'm not letting you drown," I said. "You jumped." Then I got in my car and drove away. My hand shook, but not from regret, from release. My comeback didn't look like revenge. It looked like stability. I took on extra training at work, earned a quiet promotion, and moved into a better apartment without telling anyone who didn't need to know. I started therapy in a small office downtown and talked through the shame Alyssa tried to staple to my skin. I rebuilt my finances slowly. No dramatic spending, no new me parade. Just consistent deposits into an account only I controlled. I cooked for myself. I ran with King in the mornings. I slept with the lights off again. On nights when the memory hit, Alyssa's voice on the doorbell camera, laughing, saying he's gone, I didn't spiral the way I used to. I let it sting, then I let it pass. Because I had learned the difference between pain that breaks you and pain that teaches you where the exits are. The final paperwork arrived in a plain envelope. I opened it alone at my kitchen counter. No ceremony, no victory speech, just signatures, terms, and an ending that didn't require Alyssa's permission. Later that night, I took King out for a walk. The air was cold and clean. Street lights made small circles on the sidewalk. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I stood under the quiet sky in Cincinnati, hand on King's leash, and realized something simple and powerful. Alyssa had tried to erase me from my own life. But I was still here, still standing, still building. And the best part was that nobody had to clap for it. It was mine, successful, private, real. The unknown number kept calling over the next few days, always once, sometimes twice, always at odd hours. I never answered. I had learned the hard way that any conversation with Alyssa, her friends, or anyone tied to her could become a weapon if it wasn't documented. So I let it ring, saved the timestamps, and kept moving like my peace depended on caution, because it did. A week later, I got a voicemail from that same unknown number. It wasn't Alyssa. It was a woman with a steady, professional voice. "Mr. Grant, my name is Cynthia Lewis. I'm with compliance at Northridge Freight Systems. This call is regarding a review involving Ms. Alyssa Grant. Please return my call." I sat at my kitchen counter and stared at the wall until my eyes went unfocused. My first instinct was to help, to explain, to be reasonable. Then I remembered the porch audio, Alyssa saying I was gone like she'd thrown away an empty bottle. I remembered her threat to call the police. I remembered Tasha walking into my house like she owned it. I forwarded the voicemail to Renee Whitaker and wrote, "Do I respond?" Renee replied within an hour. "No direct contact. I will handle it if needed." The relief that hit me was strange. It wasn't satisfying. It was the feeling of being protected by something other than my own restraint. Alyssa's messages changed tone after that. She stopped insulting me and started fishing. "Did someone call you? Are you talking to people? Why are you doing this to me?" Each text tried to hook me into defending myself, as if my silence was a confession. I didn't bite. I sent everything to Renee. The next punch came from someone I didn't expect, Alyssa's mother, Denise. Denise had always been polite to my face, the kind of woman who hugged you at holidays while quietly counting your flaws. She called Marcus's phone because Alyssa didn't have mine anymore. Marcus put her on speaker without telling her. "Malik," Denise said, voice syrup sweet. I heard you're trying to take Alyssa's house. My jaw tightened. It's not Alyssa's house, I said evenly. It's marital property. Denise sighed like I was exhausted. My daughter is under a lot of stress. You dragging attorneys into this is unnecessary. I looked at Marcus, and he looked back at me like, let her talk. Let her show who she is. She threw me out, I said. At night, threatened to call the police. Denise's voice sharpened. Alyssa felt unsafe. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Unsafe from what, Denise? From me asking who was texting her about meeting up? Denise paused. Then she said the cruelest, cleanest thing. If you had been a stronger husband, she wouldn't have looked elsewhere. My throat closed. For a second, I couldn't speak. Not because I agreed, because I couldn't believe she said it out loud, so calmly like a rule. Goodbye, Denise, I said, and I hung up. My hands shook afterward, not with rage, but with grief. I had been loyal to people who would rewrite my pain into my fault without blinking. That night, I sat in my apartment with King's head in my lap and realized something that hurt worse than the cheating. Alyssa didn't just betray me. She built a small army of people willing to validate her betrayal as long as it protected her comfort. My work became my refuge and my danger at the same time. I kept my performance steady, showed up early, stayed late, kept records. But I felt exposed, like the slightest mistake could be used against me if Alyssa decided to reach into that part of my life too. And she tried. 2 weeks later, my manager pulled me aside in a quiet office. Malik, he said gently, we received a call about you. My stomach dropped. From who? He hesitated. A woman. She said she was your wife. She said you've been harassing her. The room tilted for a second. Not because I feared my manager, but because I recognized the pattern. Alyssa couldn't control me anymore, so she tried to control the environment around me. I haven't contacted her except through my attorney, I said carefully. I can provide documentation. My manager nodded slowly. That's what I told HR. I need you to understand, this is informal right now, but you should protect yourself. I emailed Renee the moment I got back to my desk. Renee's reply came fast. Do not panic. We'll send notice of harassment to opposing counsel. Continue no contact. That night, alone, I finally felt the full weight of it. Alyssa wasn't just done with me. She wanted me weakened, quiet, punished for not disappearing cleanly. I started therapy the next week with Dr. Nia Brooks in Cincinnati, a small office on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown. No dramatic atmosphere, just a couch, a chair, and a box of tissues that made me angry because I didn't want to need them. Dr. Brooks asked, what are you afraid will happen if you stop trying to be reasonable with unreasonable people? I stared at the carpet and admitted the truth. I'm afraid I'll become bitter. I'm afraid I'll turn into the kind of man who can't love again. She nodded like she'd heard it before. Bitter isn't the same as boundaries, she said. You can be kind and still refuse harm. The next month was a slow, humiliating grind. Not dramatic, worse. The kind of pain that repeats daily in small ways. Waking up and remembering you're not going home. Seeing couples in grocery stores and feeling your chest tighten. Hearing your old street name on the news and flinching like it's personal. Alyssa delayed everything she could. She missed deadlines. Claimed she couldn't find documents. Claimed she didn't understand requests. Her attorney apologized for her overwhelm. And I learned that in adult life, people will dress sabotage up in soft language and call it stress. Meanwhile, the compliance review at Alyssa's job widened. Renee received a formal inquiry asking whether Alyssa had used marital funds to cover expenses tied to vendor reimbursements. Renee answered with facts, nothing more. Still, it felt surreal watching my private heartbreak bump into corporate procedure. Alyssa blamed me for that too. Her texts came late at night, scattered and angry. They suspended me. Do you feel good now? I'm going to lose everything. Then, minutes later, please. We can fix this. That emotional whiplash used to hook me. It didn't anymore. Therapy helped me name it. Not love, not remorse, control withdrawal. One Saturday, I drove to Columbus for another supervised property retrieval. Not because I wanted more items, because I needed closure in pieces. The house looked the same from the outside, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place where I had been erased. Inside, I noticed the little details first. My mug missing, my framed college photo gone, my favorite throw blanket replaced with something bright and unfamiliar. Someone had been actively rewriting the space to make it clear I wasn't part of it. Alyssa stood in the kitchen with crossed arms while I packed. No tears. No apology. Evan wasn't there this time, but his presence still was. New shoes by the door, a jacket on the couch, a men's watch on the counter that wasn't mine. "You're really doing all this over one mistake," Alyssa said, voice flat. I didn't look at her. "It wasn't one mistake," I replied. "It was a decision. Then another. Then another." She scoffed. "You always have to be right." That sentence almost made me laugh. Right. Like I had won something. Like I had gained anything other than pain and paperwork. On my way out, I crouched to pet King, still trapped there, still confused. Alyssa watched me with a look that was almost possessive. "Don't confuse him," she snapped. I stood slowly. "He's not confused," I said. "He remembers who cared for him." Alyssa's mouth tightened. For a second, I thought she might actually hit me with a truth of her own. Instead, she said, "Get out." Back in Cincinnati, I kept my life small and consistent. Work, therapy, gym, walking with Marcus when I couldn't stand being alone. Quiet meals that tasted like nothing until, slowly, they didn't. Then the compliance piece finally snapped into something more serious. Cynthia Lewis called Renee again, and Renee asked me to join a three-way call, not to testify, just to confirm a narrow fact, whether I had authorized certain expenses that appeared under Alyssa's reimbursement code. I sat at my table, hands flat on the wood, and answered carefully. "No," I said. "I didn't authorize them. I wasn't aware of them until I reviewed joint statements after the separation." Cynthia's voice stayed neutral. "Thank you," she said. "That is helpful." When the call ended, my stomach churned, not with guilt, but with the awful understanding that Alyssa had done something beyond betrayal. She had been living like the consequences were for other people. The next week, Alyssa's attorney requested an emergency meeting. Renee attended without me, and later summarized it in one sentence that made my chest go cold. "They're trying to settle quickly because Alyssa may be terminated." Terminated. A clean corporate word that still sounded like a door slamming. Alyssa called me that night, crying for real this time. Messy, panicked, not pretty. "Malik," she choked out, "I can't lose my job. Please, I need you to tell them you didn't mean what you said." I sat still, phone pressed to my ear, and felt a strange quiet. "I didn't mean what?" I asked. She stopped, breath hitching. "That I stole. I didn't steal. I was going to pay it back." There it was. Not an apology to me. A confession about money, about risk, about how she'd gambled with both our lives and called it manageable. "Alyssa," I said softly, "you threw me out and threatened to call the police on me. You can't ask me to protect you from consequences now." "So you hate me," she whispered. I closed my eyes. "This isn't hate," I said. "This is me not rescuing you." She hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, breathing through the tremor in my hands. Dr. Brooks had warned me. When you stop being someone's cushion, they accuse you of being the floor. Alyssa was terminated 2 weeks later. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from Denise, who left a voicemail full of fury. "You ruined her," Denise hissed. "God sees what you did." I listened once, then deleted it. I was done letting people assign me blame for Alyssa's decisions. Without her job, Alyssa's grip on the house loosened fast. Mortgage payments didn't care about pride. Her attorney requested modifications. Renee responded with calm numbers and tighter boundaries. The tone shifted completely, like someone had finally told Alyssa no, in a language she couldn't override. Evan disappeared quietly during that time. No dramatic breakup scene I witnessed. Just absence. The car that used to be in the driveway stopped appearing. The extra shoes vanished. The watch disappeared. The kind of man who walks into another man's home with confidence rarely stays when the electricity flickers. Alyssa texted me a single sentence after he left. He said, "I'm too much." I stared at it and felt nothing at first. Then I felt the faintest ache, not for her, but for the reality that she had burned everything for someone who couldn't even stand beside her when her life got heavy. The legal process still wasn't quick. It was months of filings, negotiations, and slow pressure. Alyssa tried a new tactic. She claimed she needed spousal support. Renee didn't laugh. She simply asked for full financial disclosures and employment records. Alyssa's side backed off quietly after that. Around that time, I got King back, officially. Not because Alyssa became kind, but because the paperwork became unavoidable and the leverage stopped working. When I brought him into my apartment, he spun in circles and whined like his whole body was relieved. I sat on the floor and cried in his fur until my chest stopped shaking. That was the first night I slept deeply in months. Not because everything was resolved, because something precious was no longer being held hostage. With King back, my routines became real again. Morning walks, evening walks, small conversations with neighbors, a regular face at the corner coffee shop who started remembering my order. Those little repetitions rebuilt parts of me Alyssa had tried to scatter. Alyssa's karma didn't arrive as a public humiliation. It arrived as a private collapse, job loss, debt repayment demands, dwindling allies, and the slow realization that intimidation only works until someone documents it. Denise stopped calling once she understood I wouldn't argue. Tasha faded too, especially when Alyssa needed help paying bills. People are loud when they're protecting comfort. They get quieter when comfort becomes expensive. The house became the final turning point. Alyssa wanted to keep it, but she couldn't refinance without steady income. She proposed that I just sign it over so she could figure things out. Renee responded with one sentence. No. A month later, Alyssa had to agree to sell. Not because I demanded spectacle, but because math demanded honesty. The home she used to lock me out of was now leaving her hands through a process she couldn't scream at. On closing day, I didn't go. I didn't drive by. I didn't watch. Renee called afterward and said, "It's done." That was all. No celebration. Just a clean into a chapter that had been bleeding me slowly. The final divorce paperwork came later, thick, plain, indifferent. I signed in my apartment with King sleeping near my feet. Marcus was there, not saying much, just existing beside me like a reminder that I hadn't been alone even when it felt like it. After I signed, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied out, and then, quietly, I felt space. A strange, gentle space where anxiety used to live. Alyssa tried one last time to reach me directly a week later. She showed up at my building, waiting near the entrance like she belonged there. When I stepped out with King, she flinched at the sight of him, like it shocked her that anything could leave her and still thrive. "Malik," she said, voice low, "I didn't think you'd really let me go." I kept my hand steady on King's leash. "You let me go," I said. That night, on the porch, you said it out loud. Alyssa's eyes filled. I was angry. I nodded once. "Anger doesn't explain planning," I said. "Anger doesn't explain threatening the police. Anger doesn't explain inviting him inside before my car was even gone." Her face tightened, and I saw the old reflex, deflect, rewrite, blame. But it didn't have anywhere to land anymore. "So that's it," she whispered. "That's it," I said. Not cruelly, not loudly, just honestly. I walked past her and didn't look back. In the elevator, my knees went weak for a second. Adrenaline, memory, old fear. Then the doors opened, and I stepped into my hallway and felt my body settle again. My comeback wasn't a new relationship posted online. It wasn't a glow-up people applauded. It was a private success, a better role at work after I completed extra certification, a quiet savings account that grew month by month, therapy sessions where I stopped apologizing for being hurt, and mornings where I woke up without immediately bracing for emotional violence. I moved into a slightly larger place a year later, still modest but mine. I bought furniture slowly, with intention. I hung photos again, Marcus and me as kids, my graduation, King on his first day back with me. Sometimes the memories still came. The porch audio, Alyssa's laughter, the way the door shut. But it came like weather now. It passed through instead of living inside me. One evening, Dr. Brooks asked, "What do you think you learned?" I thought for a long time before answering. "That love without safety is not love," I said. "And that peace is something you have to guard, even from people you once trusted with it." The last time I heard Alyssa's name, it was through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned she'd moved back in with Tasha for a while, then to a smaller place outside Columbus. No details, no drama, just a reduced life after a reckless one. I didn't feel joy about it. I felt clarity. Actions have weight. Mine finally had weight, too. On a cold night in Cincinnati, I took King for a late walk. The street was quiet, the air sharp, the sky clear. I realized I hadn't checked my phone for hours. I hadn't thought about Alyssa all day. I stood under a streetlight with King leaning against my leg and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Simple private safety. The kind nobody can fake and nobody can take. If this ending hits you in the chest, don't just leave it here. Subscribe for more private success karma stories and share this with someone who needs the reminder. Boundaries aren't cruelty. Also, what would you do the moment you heard he's gone on that camera? Drop it in the comments. The end.